8 minutes and 46 seconds is the duration that Derek Chauvin um, plastered his knee on George Floyd's neck. Breonna Taylor, no knock warrant, botched, went wrong, shots fired, multiple shots fired through the house to her body. Ahmaud Arbery, chased down and gunned down. Just the political climate that happened there, as soon as those things happened, I just felt this emotion of exhaustion, so to speak. Like I was completely exhausted because I'm thinking yet again, here we go again, the same type of situations that continuously have happened throughout American history since the arrival of the first enslaved people in 1619. And here we continue to think that these stories are fabricated, that maybe our emotions, we're too emotionally attached to these issues. But over any period of history, we continue to see these things reoccur and reoccur often. I'm cautiously optimistic that things will get better. Right now, I will say that I'm actually inspired. So I'll remove the cautiously optimistic. I'll say I am inspired because it's the first time in my lifetime the voice of the oppressed is amplified more than it's ever been. And now, at the same time that the voices are amplified, there are willing ears to listen, and people who are actually engaging in these conversations that they may not have engaged in before. And so I always think that we have a chance as long as people are out and about and are wanting to create a change for us. And so keep hope, but remain cautiously optimistic. But in the moment, I am inspired. I'm also inspired at the mere fact that we have so many young people that are out and that are being outspoken, that are being heard, because their voice at this point is yelling through the mountaintops, and a lot of people are listening. Young people are involved in the revolution. My only concern is that this is not a moment, but this is truly a movement now. I don't want to see lip service. We've heard that, we've had that before, but now it's time to move past the lip service and get engaged into actionary steps. As far as the educator piece, I've been very adamant, even before now, to get us engaged in action that's inclusive inside of our classrooms, that's inclusive inside of our learning spaces, period. There's a wave that's wrapped around decolonizing the curriculum, right? And working on removing whitewashed historical statements and infusing different cultural markers that celebrate not only each ethnic group, but the grand progress that each group contributes to the what American dream that we are all quote unquote shooting for here. And so what I'm going to attempt to do throughout this 15-minute video is I'm about actionary steps again. And I have a lot of teachers in since my position is an educator and an instructional leader, I have teachers that often reach out to me all the time asking what can they do, right? And that's an uncomfortable question. But we, at this point, have to engage in some uncomfortable questions and really dive into it, because these things are hunting. These things are traumatic. People are living with these day-to-day fears and these day-to-day anxieties, and that's not for any just random reason. These happen, or this is happening, because people have experienced this over and over and have not seen due justice in the wake of all of these different killings. As whereas we can go list and name for name, and we can spend 15 minutes naming the people that have been taken at the at the hands of a police officer when they were unarmed, or they were committing a non-violent offense, right? And all of a sudden it's escalated past what it probably should be, but none of it warrants somebody to die. So for the educators, as we all are listening to this recording, I'm going to share with you guys some books from my library, from my own personal library at home, that if you want to know how to engage, if you want to know how to peep in and see like what's going on, some of these books in here are awesome. Really, I'm not going to list a bad book. I really think all the books that I'm going to list can definitely help turn the needle inside of our classrooms, inside of the educational structure, because these things are systematic. And until we are ready to address the systematic racism that occurs day to day in our day-to-day operations, we won't be ready to move forward fully. So again, these books, and I'm looking at them, just left one, so I'll mention that one as well. But again, these come from my personal library right here in my apartment, and I hold these near and dear to me. And I've taken so much of my life and my perspective from these books. Okay, so the first one that I'll talk about here is called Young, Gifted, and Black, Promoting High Achievement among African American students, right? And so this book is by a series of authors, 3 different authors, Teresa Perry, Claude Steele, and Asa Hilliard III. Okay, so throughout this book, really talking about setting the standard for high expectations, pushing the needle forward, and promoting this sense of high achievement that these students are really, they come to class with. But the different systems, again, we talked about systematic racism, begins to pull it down, right? And we don't see this emergence of gifted black students past right elementary level. Studies showing it to go through this book. It talks about the studies throughout this book that, you know, black kids are even and often higher than the other ethnic groups that they are in school with through elementary. But the transition point, second or third grade, third to fourth grade, is when the decline starts. And so we have to continue to promote this high achievement. So this is a solid book. This next book here is Black Teachers on Teaching. So you want to know the perspectives of these teachers and how difficult it is for them to be inside of a classroom. They give you great insight on what it's like for them, how it was for them growing up. And so it's documenting teachers that were really teaching throughout the 60s that was involved in the integration phase of education, right? So right after Brown versus Board, and then we get to the Civil Rights Movement. And this is a great narrative for this. So this is Michelle Foster. Excellent book. As you can see, I got things tabbed, and I really got tabs in all of them. But this book right here can give you some perspectives from a teacher's standpoint as well on how to address these different things. This book by Dr. Emden, I've had the opportunity to meet Dr. Emden, but the title is For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and for the rest of y'all too. So it talks about reality pedagogy and urban education. So what he goes through a list of pedagogical styles to address inside your classroom if you want to be able to push the needle forward. So this is a great book, and again, it's an abrasive title, but it's meant to be an abrasive, but it's inclusive because it says it for the rest of y'all too. So I'm including for the rest of y'all, but this is a good book for a starter, a conversation starter. This book, The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachings of African American Children. So Gloria Lasting Billing is excellent. She's the person who coined the term culturally relevant teaching. And this is, again, like for us specifically, since we're doctoral students, this book goes through like a whole methodology. This is a study, right? And so she lays it out as an introduction, as a literature review, as a narrative methodology. It looks just like an article that we would read, but it's much more engaging because it's basically like a findings in chapter 5 type book that she's going through. But she engages with some critical learning that we really need when it comes to culturally relevant teaching. And more specifically, this is from teachers who have been successfully teaching African American students. So they tell you a lot of things. Good. So again, we talk about decolonizing our curriculum. We can replace some of the books that we have to read, Lord of the Flies, all those, Mice and Men. And this book by Ernest Gaines is excellent. A Lesson Before Dying is solid. Throughout this whole book, it's a fiction, but it's a nonfiction with some, let me see, hyperboles throughout. He exaggerates a few things, but this is a great book through and through. the main character, Bigger Thomas. You get a perspective in this book like no other. And I recommend we can replace a couple different books inside of our curriculum. So this is going to help us move forward. Invisible Man got the whole world watching me. A young black man's education. So Michael Smith does a great job of detailing his life and some things that he's had to endure. He talks about his own encounters with police brutality, and he talks about just the journey and the track that he had to go throughout his education to get to the point in education that he's currently at. So this is a good conversation starter. Just like A Lesson Before Dying, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye should be in all of our English classes. This book gives a great perspective from a female's point of view of how hard it is for them to grow up in a white society, that pretty much everything that they think is a beauty mark of themselves is not the standard of European beauty or Eurocentric beauty. And so Toni Morrison addresses a lot of these different things throughout this book. So I recommend this as a conversation starter as well. We want to do more than survive. Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom. Benita Love wrote this book in, I want to say, 2017. And I remember getting it pretty early. I do remember getting it in 2017 and just going back and reading it. I actually read this book twice through two conferences that I went to doing doctoral work. Some professors in a different post session was actually referencing this book just because it really gives you some pointers on how to be an abolitionist teacher to break down the barriers of systemic racism and be inclusive inside of the classrooms. Promises Kept. This is a long book. It's pretty lengthy, but it's good. If you don't read the whole thing, reading synopsises of each chapter pretty much can give you an idea. But it talks about raising black boys to success in school and in life. So moving past just school, like let's look at how do we engage these students for their real lives and things that they're going to be going through. This next book, Lisa Delpit, I actually have another copy. This is a free copy, so if one of y'all want this, I can give it to you. My other one is down there. But this book, Multiplication is for White People, Raising Expectations for Other People's Children. And so before she included this title there, Dr. Delpit actually had Raising Expectations for Other Children, It was, I think her original book was called Teaching Others Children, and she talked about raising expectations. So throughout, she's giving you the perspective of to remove your cultural barriers and your cultural biases and your implicit bias and really listen to what students are saying so that you can be a warrior to fight the things that the students that are coming to your classroom that they bring with them of negative stereotypes. How do we attack and defeat those? So Dr. Delpit, Lisa Delpit, did an excellent job in this book. Monique Morris, Push Out, the criminalization of black girls in schools, talks heavily about how the implicit bias and cultural deficits really impact the black female student and how we tend to hyper discipline these girls for these the stereotype of they're loud, they're rowdy, and how we weaponize that and end up pushing these girls out and criminalizing them and pretty much setting them on an educational path that's not positive. So this book is good. Dr. Monique Morris, I 10 out of 10 recommend this as well. Oh man, Why Are All the Black Children Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? This book by Dr. Tatum. Again, this is up there with all of the things that I hold dear to me. This is probably one of the first books that I really read that started opening my eyes to some education things that I wasn't aware of. But pretty much like Dr. Morris in Push Out, Dr. Tatum here lays out some fundamental values that we need to work on eradicating if we're going to push our students to the next level. This book should be inside of undergraduate classes. This book should be in master's level education, doctoral level education, this book should be mandatory at some point throughout their journey there. Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice to Freedom. So this book is pretty much like the abolitionist teacher that Dr. Love was talking about when we want to move to abolitionist teaching. Bell Hooks is a phenomenal feminist writer, a womanist writer as well, but she spends adequate time here discussing education and how we get to the practice of freedom, how we essentially decolonize our curriculum and be inclusive to the people, to the audience that's inside of the room. So Teaching to Transgress is a book that I also recommend. Teaching Education and the Culture of Imagination. Again, this book gives you pretty much almost step-by-step things that you can do, provides you with a checklist inside of the classroom that you can do to work on your tools to better assess you as you become a better educator there. Again, including books in the curriculum during high school. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Maya Angelou, almost like Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison. In The Bluest Eye, Maya Angelou is giving you a first-person perspective on how rough life was for her. This is a biography, and she gives you pieces and bits of information that a lot of girls go through that they don't speak up about. And so this book should be on the shelves in K-12 classrooms. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. This is a memoir. He wrote the book essentially to his son, and he's detailing the triumphs that he's overcome. He's talking about the barriers that existed and the pitfalls that he had to maneuver through. But he's giving you, again, a firsthand primary source version of what it's like growing up as a young black kid and having everything against you. Man, he has some powerful quotes in here throughout the entirety of the book. So I recommend Ta-Nehisi Coates there. The book that even inspired him, and the book, this is probably it's in my top 3. James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. Again, this is a memoir. He pretty much sets this as he is talking to his nephew. But just like Ta-Nehisi Coates in Between the World and Me, he's laying it out, giving you this real life perspective of what it's like growing up and how difficult it is growing up, and what are some things that we can do differently now so that we don't have to have a fire this time. And it's actually kind of talks about what we're doing. His book comes after the Watts riots, and he talks about the fire next time coming again. And in the wake of George Floyd, we sure had fire this time. So James Baldwin, again, K-12 classrooms, it needs to be there. Now, 2 books from civil rights activists that are solid. First, let's talk about Dr. King here, and where do we go from here? This is his last book that he wrote before his assassination, and he's talking about where are we going now that we've obtained integration. Like, at this point now, what is the next conversation that's going to turn the corner for America, and what's going to get us over the top, and what's going to get us past just the integration phase, right? What's going to make us better. And so this book should be, if you want to engage in conversation, you can definitely start here with this book. And now my all-time favorite book by my all-time favorite activist, probably the most misunderstood guy and wrongfully stereotyped activist during the 60s, Brother Malcolm X. This is his autobiography. Everybody that I know that has read this book comes back with a new perspective about Brother Malcolm X, but again, about life more than anything. This is the most this book has the most Google searches ever. So this book is transformative, and so I recommend that. But again, I can sit here and be sad about George Floyd and everything that's happening, and I am, and rightfully so. But I want to take this time to give people some book suggestions to dive into, not just random books that hit on a topic, but I'm talking about real tangible. I mean, books that's going to talk about real tangible items that promotes your learning, that pushes the walls that you may have up, and it works on tearing all of those down. So every book that I mentioned, I went through, I pulled things from, I've learned things. And a book that I didn't mention, but it's called The New Jim Crow, which is by Michelle Alexander. And you want to talk about systematic racism and how the system, the judicial system, works against the black and brown body. That book is mandatory, absolutely mandatory. And it ties in with everything that we're talking about now, how the system works to oppress black and brown, but then, and on the counter end of that, white people that are committing the same crimes are getting off, or they're getting much less and less severe consequences for those same actions. So she breaks it down case by case, era by era, and goes through a litany of examples. So The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander is the book that I'm discussing. Again, I'm inspired. I think that we're on the right path. I think we're making great moves and great strides. And I can't wait to see where we're going in this. It's not enough to be an armchair revolutionary at this point. It's our duty now to be civically engaged and speaking out and be outspoken and be heard and be uncomfortable in them situations, so that we can ensure that equity crosses every line and crosses every fence there. And then once we get to equity, we can start discussing equality. But again, I'm fully immersed and I'm excited. Again, cautiously optimistic, but we will see. Just keep fighting the good fight.